Welcome to the last week of the semester as we have one of the final lectures on social engineering. Social engineering is really one of the most common ways attackers gain both information and access to your systems. A good definition for social engineering is really any act where you try to manipulate a person to accomplish a goal, whether or not that goal is in that person's interests. So disclosure of information, or maybe access to the server room, or could you reset my password? I leave it up to your imagination. So let's start off with gaining information. The obligatory definition for reconnaissance comes straight out of military textbooks. It has to do with terrain and blah, 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 but think of it more like topology for a network, what the servers might be running, what operating system the person on the other side of the phone might be using, what personal security products they may have set up from IT, what version of the internet browser they're using, as well as email, browser, etc., etc. And it all comes back full circle to the pen tester life cycle, which is used both by good guys and bad guys. And social engineering really plays a part in recon, not so much for scanning and vulnerability assessment, although it can be used to identify what they have on the inside of their network if you can social engineer that out of someone. A really good place to witness this is the social engineering capture flag games every year at DEF CON. Really just hands down phenomenal display of social engineering talent, manipulation, deceivery, if that's even a word, and manipulating people to find tiny pieces of information about their network, obviously without their consent. Aside from that, obviously social engineering, especially in a physical setting, can be used for gaining access without having to do any form of exploitation. And then also once attacker has compromised, say, I don't know, the password and username of an important member of an organization, they can use that to privilege escalate to higher levels of access. And perhaps also to, spearfish the rest of the organization and pivot and own the entire organization. Social engineering for reconnaissance can be both a passive thing and an active thing. Passive really has to do with leveraging all the social media assets that are available to anyone with a connection to the internet. Perhaps also any forms of signal analysis, although that's bordering on breaking FCC guidelines, and very rare. You won't see that in a pen test often. And then human intelligence often has to do with calling someone or perhaps even visiting on site. So before engaging in a pen test, it's very common for the pen tester to first look up the company on the internet, scour the company website, scour social media for anyone who says they work at the company rather, and that may range from LinkedIn to Monster to anywhere that has recruiting and jobs and career endeavors in mind, all the way to Twitter and Facebook and etc. Also, common targets for open source intelligence gathering are public records, tax records, any form of them in the news, any form of the target company in stock news, as well as also DNS records. DNS records will sometimes state who the domain admin is. You might be able to call saying, hey, Joe, the admin, told me I need to get this done. I don't know how to do this. It's my first day on the job. Can you please really help me out? You'd be my hero if you help me do this. Otherwise, I'm probably going to get fired. So, another often overlooked resource is the Wayback Machine. For companies that have been around long enough, the concept of security and policies on what should and shouldn't be online weren't well formed, especially back going into the late 90s and later past that. If you can find traces of the company on the Wayback Machine, you might be able to expose critical information that might come handy in attacking the company. Now, obviously, that's a big problem for good guys trying to defend against the bad guys doing this to them. So, if there's any news about the upcoming mergers that a company might be going through, even if it's just rumors, or outsourcing departments, or downsizing, or this and that can really be leveraged for successful social engineering. You can say, you're calling up from this parent company, we're going to acquire you and merge you. We need you to give us your network layout so we can assess whether or not it meets our standards and policies. That's a huge piece of information. Now, I'm just going to jump straight to human intelligence and social engineering actual people. There is a line that's drawn very upfront in most pen tests and engagements on whether or not this is allowed. And there are certain companies that really stress that the target company does not misinterpret the results. Because if you go through a pen test and you simply ask the CEO secretary for access to something and it's granted, the CEO might respond by just outright firing their secretary. However, if you turn that around and tell the secretary what they did wrong, I guarantee you that person is going to be the best damn watchdog you have, security-wise, and for OPSEC. So, it goes both ways, but often it goes the wrong way. So, in general, intelligence gathering has to do with observables, whether you can directly observe that you can ping this server on the internet, it's got this IP address, it's running this operating system, and it's running this version of Apache. That's a direct observable. An indirect observable would perhaps be calling them, asking them what form of browser they use just by social engineering, tricking them, and asking them, do you use Chrome? And they say no. Yes. Do you use Firefox? No. And then they wise up and they hang up on you. But you might be able to indirectly observe that they're probably using Internet Explorer or Safari or something like that. Now, inferential observations often involve no interaction with the target whatsoever. Think of it best like you scoured LinkedIn and you found all the candidates for their systems group or their IT on LinkedIn to say they currently work there. Now, from their skill set, you see that the majority of them are Linux users, and maybe only 2 of them are Windows. You might be able to infer correctly that they have a primarily Linux network. So, I'm going to jump into hacking the human mind and exploiting evolutionary triggers that we have whether we like them or not. And everyone has these, including myself. It really comes from that our brains are optimized over the thousands of years that we've been around the human race. And just until the last really 50 years have we had this huge wealth of technology connection, and we've gone from really this small tribal life that human beings were really optimized for to knowing perhaps hundreds of people on your Twitter feed and stuff like that. So that teases out a lot of weird behavior in the human mind, more often than it did in the average human lifespan 1,000 years ago. Because we're so much more connected and we know so much more people, it's easier to observe all these weird behaviors that humans do. And before I talk about humans, I'm going to really go over this really interesting case that it sprung from this symbiotic relationship that the grouper and the cleaner fish have, and how another fish came along to observe it, evolve to it, and prey upon it. So, the grouper goes around eating other fish. He eats lots and lots of fish, and grows bacteria in his mouth, and is not really well equipped, tongue-wise, to clean the insides of his mouth. And somehow, this cleaner fish evolved to primarily feed upon, as a scavenger, the leftovers from other fish. And it really likes what is on the inside of the grouper's mouth. But there's a problem. The grouper eats other fish. And how are you going to get inside the grouper's mouth, eat your fill, not get chewed up, and then get out? It discovered, evolutionarily, this quiescence dance, that if it dances in just the right way, the grouper will enter a slack-jawed state. And its mouth will droop open, its eyes will kind of glaze over and stare into the distance, and its tongue will grow numb, and the cleaner fish can swim in, eat its fill, and leave. And then the grouper wakes up, actually with no memory of what just happened. But its mouth is now magically clean. So, if you could perhaps take that and invent that for children, you'd be a billionaire dentist, because kids would have no memory of having just brushed their teeth. Joking aside, what happened was a form of exploitation of evolutionary trigger called mimicry, where the Sabretooth Blenny, down here in the bottom, would observe this dance, and I don't know if it's a learned behavior or it's an evolutionary one. I'm not a biologist, and I'm regurgitating this presentation and these specific points from seeing it previously by Dr. Philip Kegelmeyer at San Diego National Labs, who's a phenomenal speaker. That aside, the Sabretooth Blenny somehow figured out, let's say it evolved the same way, to do this dance, and what it likes to do is it likes to eat other fish. And the grouper is a big fish, it's got a lot of meat on it. It learned the quiescence dance, and it does it, and then it goes inside the grouper's mouth, and it chews it to pieces. Now, it doesn't do it to the point where it kills the grouper fish. In fact, it's a bit more smarter than that. It only takes its fill and herds around the grouper fish, really, or keeps a watch over a herd of them. It obviously has no power to enforce which way it goes. It doesn't have any form of bark or bite. You can't herd them around like a shepherd dog. But it carefully watches a flock and makes sure not to kill outright any particular grouper. And that way, it has a constant source of food. And it just keeps swimming from grouper to grouper, doing the little dance. The grouper enters a slacked-off state, and then when it wakes back up, its mouth is sore as hell and has no memory of what just happened. Which is fascinating. So, coming away from that tangent, a really good starting point for this discussion is a awesomely scientific study on lameness and compliance from Harvard in the 70s. The goal of the study was to figure out what is the minimum we need to do statistically to get someone else to do us a favor. The environment was the library during the later half of the semester when everyone was busy, and the test subjects were grad students, and the victims were other students, undergrad, graduate, doesn't matter, but their role was that they had lined up and they were already using the copy machine. The goal of the grad student would be to get the other person to let them use the copy machine instead, even if they're already making copies. The control group would just ask, can I use the copier? And the experimental group would ask, can I use a copier because of blank? And they toyed around with various different reasons. And what they found was really amazing. So the control group got 64% compliance with just no reason given, which is pretty damn generous if you ask me. I would not say yes. I would tell them to go to another floor and find a different copier. But the first trial, the very first reason was because I am in a hurry, got 94% compliance. And it honestly has a pretty good reason. If they only have 5 pages, it's not going to take that long. They could have tweaked with 5 to 500, and obviously there's some room to wiggle there, but that's not as interesting as toying around with these reasons. So they established this very high baseline with this very good reason, And then there's a control group with no reason. What they decide to do after that is vary the lameness of the reason scientifically to see what might give you an advantage in gaining compliance from someone for any arbitrary request. So really their thesis was, can we vary the lameness of our reason and explore how it affects this compliance rate range? And they explored more compelling reasons and then less compelling reasons. And the results, regardless of what they were, I mean, the reasons, regardless of what they were resulted in ultimately relatively high compliance. And the one ultra lame reason that really hit the nail on the head and made them step back and look at the big picture was the reason, hi, I have 5 pages, can I use a copier because I need to make copies? This is a completely specious reason. There's no value whatsoever to this. There's no reason provided. It's obvious that you are in line for the copier and you have pages and you need to use it. That's no different than, hi, I have 5 pages, can I use the copier? But that only gets 64%, but this lame-ass reason gets 93% compliance. Eventually, the researchers discovered and published that the magic word is not please. It's not pretty pleased with the cherry on top. The magic word is because. It exploits an evolutionary trigger, just like the Sabretooth Blenny's quiescence stance. That once your brain hears because, it doesn't really matter much what follows after it. It just drops into this more compliant state. And it comes back to that it's because our brains are more trusting of other people. And this does split up between cultures. But across the board, at every culture's roots, small tribal life had few liars. And the liars that existed would get exiled and shamed. And it was... It was common that most people would be truthful with you, even though if they didn't like you, they may tell half-truths. At least they'd be truthful. So, here we are now. And the rest of this talk is going to focus on 6 quirks of the human brain that especially are useful for pen testing and social engineering. And the 6 quirks are reciprocity, or returning the favor, consistency, or maintaining your point of view, being consistent with your previous actions, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. So, reciprocity is really exploited a lot by charities, is exploited a lot by telemarketers, and it basically means that we tend to return favors regardless of the original favor, even if we didn't want the original favor. And this is why charities, when you go to a charity ball or a charity event or a fundraising thing, they hand you flowers or drinks or snacks or something before asking for donations. And it exploits the temptation to, return the favor, even though you didn't want the original one. So this is also useful for negotiation. And this is really bartering 101. You'll most commonly see this where businesses first offer you an outrageous first price and then will concede down to a reasonable price. You'll see this on pawn shops and all the stupid pawn shop shows on TV. And as long as sufficient concessions are made, even when people are ripped off, they end up feeling happier about it. And this is one of those evolutionary quirks of the human mind that you can trigger, you can exploit. So one of the best ways to exploit reciprocity in your normal career is when it's not a crisis and you've fixed something for your superior, to say, hey, I fixed that for you. Is this also a good time to talk about my performance evaluation or something like that? It triggers that quirk that they've just received a favor from you. And they might be more inclined to give you a favor as well in return, regardless of whatever the original favor was. So the next quirk I'm going to talk about is consistency. Is that we try to be consistent with our prior actions, even if the reasons or the original actions have changed. Unless, obviously, you're a politician, you're the scum of the earth. So, charities also exploit this. What charities have started doing is before calling you and asking for donations, they'll call you with a survey from like the American Cancer Society asking you how likely you would be to donate to a cause. If you really believed in it and you could see that it was really helping people. And they'll call, do this survey, and then they'll call you 2 weeks later asking you for money under a different name, obviously under the name of the legitimate charity. And this has actually skyrocketed the success of many charities. And it's a very successful tactic that involves exploiting the human mind and our consistency quirk. So salesmen also exploit this. And if you ever find yourself being talked to by a salesman, and before you hear what they're talking about, you're already filling out paperwork, you need to stop, back up, and realize that they are exploiting your brain. So it's very surprising to see how much information you get just by asking for all the information before they ask you to decide. If you've ever seen people going around asking people if they'd like to participate in a special on internet service, the latest, fastest line, or a special on a home security product with security cameras and a smash and grab prevention system. Just watch your neighbors after they come to you and see how far they get through all the paperwork before they nod or send them away. They might have gone to the page where they have to fill out their social security number, the date of birth, and it's a complete stranger that they're doing this for. But the brain unconsciously tries to make a commitment to that and tries to stay consistent, even if the terms change, which is the oddest thing. The terms may be, you can get this all for free, but after the first 6 months, you're going to have to pay us $100 a month. And that may be stated at the end of the whole process. So salesmen really do exploit that very commonly. The next quirk that's worth talking about is social proof, is that we try to do and think what other people who seem like us do and also think. This is why laugh tracks, first and foremost, are successful. Imagine your favorite sitcom or favorite comedy without a laugh track. Yeah, it's probably going to be a lot less funny. These are types of things that we know they exist. We know they're going on, but they still work. This trick still works, even though we're aware of it. No matter how hard you might try to resist it, you will probably still fall for it. Then also, another aspect of social proof that manifests in weird ways is crowd theory, is that people try to behave like the majority of a group. And one of the most dangerous places to ever have a heart attack is in the middle of a group. You can look up all sorts of videos online of people having falling down, having a seizure, or having a stroke, or having a heart attack in a restaurant near a very large table, and then they scale it down to a table 4, table 3, table 2. The smaller tables always respond and help quicker, and sometimes the larger tables just completely ignore them. It's because people collectively freeze and they're waiting for someone else to take charge. And one of the first things they teach you in EMT and lifeguard training is that you should take charge. You'd order Bob to call the police. You order the other person to get you water. You order the other person to get you towels, and you order everyone else to get the hell back. And then people get out of that lizard brain rut. Or, on the other hand, this is how riots work. So, I'm sure this is leveraged by governments in the Crimean region. People do not go protesting on their own. They don't go burning cop cars or stealing APCs and drifting them around town, which is really sweet, I'll have to admit. And they don't go around looting and vandalizing on their own. This is really only something that emerges out of crowd theory, and it's fascinating. So Peer pressure is the last aspect of this, and uh, you might be able to do information gathering and say that, hey, all my friends, or you call up a salesperson of the target company, and you'll see this in the social engineering CTF, and you say, hey, all my friends are using this awesome app on Facebook, or this awesome last password app. Do you guys recommend that? You know, I'm an art student. I don't know this stuff well. What do you use to manage your passwords? They may tell you. Um, and that may also play off on how well you've gotten them to like you, which is the next quirk I'm going to talk about, the one that's most exploited by con men. And before I go into the good cop, bad cop thing, one of the most fascinating things I've seen that's not on my slides that con men really exploit is they first and foremost, their first goal is not to get you to trust them. It's to give you the perception that they've given you their trust, that you've earned their trust. And in a weird sense, that triggers the brain to kind of like them. And so then this opens up all new avenues of compliance when dealing with that person who's trying to exploit you. So aside from that, liking is the reason that good cop, bad cop works. You rough up the person as the bad cop, and you have your nice friend come in and be like, look, this can all end if you just tell us what happened, blah, blah, blah. Make sure nothing bad happens to you. Meanwhile, you're going to rot 20 years for something. And salesmen also have successfully exploited by saying, your friend suggested I call you. And you might be able to exploit that in a social engineering phone call or physical interaction. And really the most fascinating point on this slide is that, I forgot about this, that studies will show that bad flattery works just as well as accurate flattery. Even if it's sarcastic and absurd flattery, it triggers someone to jump to that same level of humor. And the brain interprets it as flattering itself, just the very attempt of flattery. You can say to a bald person, that is an awesome haircut. Or you can say to someone, that is an awesome tail you have. How did you grow it? And it will get them to smile just because it's absurd and it's also flattery. And that's how the brain reacts. I encourage you to try that on just random people. It's actually a really good way to start conversations at a bar. The next social quirk that really works well, especially when getting into a server room, in a physical engagement in pen testing, is an air of authority. Looking like you belong, but not only belong, but you have some authority there. Everyone's seen Mad Men and seen the successful advertisements they think of. But advertising as an industry has never one-upped the famous Maxwell House coffee ad, where this actor who plays a doctor on TV simply says, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV, and Maxwell House coffee is the best coffee there is. Something like that. No advertisement to date has sold more products than that ad. He tells you right up front that he's not a doctor. He has no authority. He just pretends. But he sits there on his in his doctor's office with a lab coat, and he has this visual aura of authority that tricks the brain into trusting and complying with the advertisement more. So in social engineering, you may be able to spoof emails to subordinates if you've done enough reconnaissance on LinkedIn. Order them to follow something, and perhaps they may follow it too literally. It may work out to your advantage, but you may be able to word it in just a way that seems benign. But if they follow it too literally, and statistically, if you do it enough times and get away with it enough times, it might work out to your favor and open up some ports or something. It might allow you to gain access. So, other common ways to look like you have authority are having a clipboard and showing up, writing things down, acting like you're auditing the place. Works phenomenally well. Having any form of badge that you can flash, Do not impersonate police officers. I say again, do not impersonate law enforcement officers. I'm not encouraging any form of illegal activity here. Or having security or staff t-shirts. That will get you into the back of the concert more often than not. You might get in trouble though. Lastly, I think, is scarcity. That we tend to overvalue apparently scarce resources. And this works best in social engineering, especially in physical engagements. You say, hey, I'm here till tonight to fix this problem. I need access to the server room. You show up with your clipboard. You look like you belong. You have IT gear. And they say, I don't see you on the list. I don't know. I don't think I should let you in. You act like you have some authority, saying, your CEO called me in. I'm only here till tonight. You can explain to him yourself why I wasn't able to fix the problem because you didn't let me in, because I won't be here till next week. That's the soonest. So if you want to sit on the server room problem for 7 days, and that's 7 days that your boss is going to contemplate firing you, you might have a better chance of getting in that server room. So if you can make your value to the target company seem more scarce, and your services seem more scarce, it might improve your overall compliance in general requests. So this is very commonly studied in like middle school, elementary school science fairs with cookie jar experiments, where they have two jars and they go to like a Publix or a grocery store, and they'll have one jar half full. There's the same cookies in both jars, another one's stuffed. And they'll just say free cookies, and everyone lines up for the shorter jar because it looks more scarce and looks better. Like more people have tried it, and it works every single frickin' time. Guarantee it. Now, this also works the reverse way, and especially juries. If juries are asked to ignore invalid or dismissed or otherwise outruled evidence, they often still take it into account when they're making their deliberations. And this backfires against the courts time after time. And any form of information scarcity or censorship really just always backfires in every single experiment. Whether or not it's something like SOPA or PIPA or trying to censor the internet in Twitter or YouTube and other countries, it always backfires. So, like I said, I already said this experiment, I'm only here till such and such time. You have to authorize me to fix your problem. Otherwise, you have to wait X amount of time for me to return. Good luck explaining that to your boss and not getting fired. Now, on the flip side, you can exploit the scarcity quirk when you're talking to your group leader or your boss. You would say that, blah, blah, blah is asking me to interview with them. And that will obviously make you seem more scarce and thus make you seem to have more value, and they might comply with your request. But all of these tricks are really just statistically going to give you an increased chance in compliance. And it requires finesse to pull it off and to deliver it right. Timing is always the number one thing. And it's not always going to work. You're probably not going to get in the server room saying, I need to fix stuff, so let me in the server room because I need to fix stuff. That goes back to the copy machine experiment, but you're asking for access to something that's sensitive. And if you tried to ask for a raise, exploiting compliance, saying, remember you gave me a raise last week, well, it's about that time again, that's probably going to get you in serious trouble. So the thing to keep in mind is that social engineering goes beyond just talking to people. It really has to do with the number one way you're going to get attacked by social engineering and these tricks are phishing emails, mass phishing emails. And we already talked about the Caputo, the mask APT campaign, where it's entirely based on spear phishing as the main attack vector. And if you target a large enough company, statistically, if you play all these quirks right, you're guaranteed at least one person's going to fall for it. And that may be your way in if they download and run your malware. And even then, once you gain access to a system, you might be able to do more post-exploitation spear phishing. So this is really one of the hardest problems attack vectors to defend against for organizations. A lot of companies offer social engineering training, so you can identify when you're getting social engineered. So you can educate your employees on best policies for OPSEC and dealing with social engineering attempts. But it really comes down to the weakest links every single time. So the best way to go about using this information is practice defending yourself. It is really hard, and perhaps you can use some of the stuff I talked about, like because it's the magic word instead of please, to help raise awareness with your friends of these principles and of your coworkers. So you can practice at home by resisting advertisements for services that you usually buy, or also practice by manipulating your friends. Hey, can you buy me a beer because I need to get drunk? It might work. And you have all the summer to practice, and I encourage it as long as you're not breaking any rules. At least, don't break any laws. So, I again have to give credit to Dr. William Philip Kakelmeyer, and he gave a couple presentations on this while I was at Sandia. They were phenomenal, and this is kind of ripped off from him, so I want to give full credit to him for this. And his influence for the book, for the presentation, was a book by Robert Cialdini, Influence, Psychology and Persuasion. And I've read through parts of it. It's really, really good. And technical resources can be found at socialengineer.org, and they do offer some good trainings on resisting social engineering and raising awareness in your organization. And they are the guys who put on the Social Engineering CTF, which if you go to DEF CON, and I'm submitting a talk at DEF CON, so I hope to see some of you guys there, it is definitely one of the best events to check out. And that is it for today's lecture.